We have one police agency that we work with, Seattle Police, that has specialized detectives. So we have a wonderful relationship with those detectives because they are working directly with us as they investigate the case. Because they know that I'll be the person, or the other prosecutor in my office who does elder abuse cases will be the person to prosecute that case. So when they get the case and they don't know what to do with it, they'll call me and we'll talk about it, and I'll be involved very early on with the investigation, which helps them a lot as far as helping them to know what they should be doing to investigate the case, but also helping them to know whether or not they should be pursuing a case. It's very frustrating when detectives work really hard on investigating a case and then the prosecutor says, oh, sorry, we're not going to file this one. So by us engaging with them early on, we can help prevent that from happening and help them feel like they're not wasting their time.
Can you think of an example of a communication like that you've had with detectives early on in a case that was helpful?
A typical example would be that I would get a call from a detective who said, you know, I just got called out to this crime scene, the victim has pressure sores, you know, we've sent the body to the medical examiner's office, but like, what do we do now? And so we'll start talking very early on about what I need from them in order to investigate the case. And they will call me once they, you know, when they're ready with a search warrant. I may review the search warrant, and we'll have a back and forth throughout the investigation. And if at some point it looks to me like it's not going to be going anywhere, I will tell them that, and that way it saves them the time of working for months on a case that ends up not being prosecuted.
Though with elderly victims, there is sometimes a hesitation by law enforcement to follow through. They sometimes do listen to the victim, and the victim says, oh, I don't want anything to happen, I don't want to press charges, and they close their case. So again, I spend a lot of my time talking with law enforcement. Don't just close your case, bring it to me, and let me try to figure out how we can still prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, even though my victim is reluctant. If there is an issue with capacity, then we'll work on getting maybe a search warrant to get the medical records. Because here's another dilemma, Rhonda. If I'm going to pursue what I call scenario number 2, which is I'm going to argue to a judge and to a jury lack of capacity, that this person didn't have the ability to give consent, and I find that my detective went to the victim's home and got the victim to sign a medical release form, which is you look at it, it's a pretty complex legal document in itself. Then I'm going to have issues and problems later down the line. I've got to have a search warrant done instead. So it's very important that early on we assess capacity issues and then work with law enforcement to make sure we don't fall into a hole which otherwise the defense will exploit fully at trial.
The prosecutors in the elder abuse unit have always been very available to the police detectives that investigate these cases. And so in some cases I may call them during the investigation to confer about the case and you know, ask if there is anything additional that needs to be done. But once I feel that the investigation is complete, then I bring the case over to the prosecutor's office for them to review it. And at that time, they may ask for additional investigation, or they may decide to file charges at that time. But the biggest thing is that we've had a very open communication line between us, and I'm able to call anytime I have a question. The prosecutor has also been very forthcoming if something else is needed, or if the investigation is insufficient. They've been very good about working with the police and letting us know. So I guess the biggest thing is you know, work closely with your prosecutor to make these cases more successful.
I wish more detectives would come at an earlier stage to ask for help because there's nothing more frustrating than having a detective bring you a case after they've worked it for like 3 or 4 months, and you find a flaw which could have been detected much earlier, which really indicates that it's not going to go anywhere. And you feel for that detective because you think, gosh, you just wasted all your time on this case which will never go anywhere. If only you could have picked up the phone and asked for some guidance much earlier. which is also incumbent upon me as a prosecutor to make sure that I get out there, talk to these detectives so they know that I'm available for help and for direction if they want it and need it.
And following up on that a bit, you mentioned a couple of frustrations that law enforcement themselves might have with cases that create obstacles in pursuing them further. Can you give us some examples of those?
One of the biggest battles that I face is that I hear indirectly, either from a victim advocate or from a member of the public, that a case has been closed by the law enforcement agency because the officer has decided that, quote, it is just a civil matter. And I'm very uncomfortable with that phrase being used by a police officer. And I always say that if that police officer came to court and used that phrase, I'd be the first one to stand up and object, because it calls for a legal conclusion that this officer is probably unable to qualify to give. And so the message I always try to get out there too with law enforcement is, don't make that assumption, please. Gather the facts and bring them early on to someone like me so that we can make that decision whether it's civil or not. But if you went around the country asking Adult Protective Services or asking other people what frustrates them most about financial elder abuse cases, I think you're going to hear that message loud and clear, that too many law enforcement agencies have ruled these as, quote, civil in nature only.
The refrain of "that's a civil matter" is something we hear in Seattle as well, and I think it's heard across the country. And it's funny because there are a lot of things that are civil matters, but that doesn't mean they're not also criminal matters. So it's really not relevant as to whether or not they're civil. It has nothing to do with whether they're criminal. But there's a tremendous need for training and increased public awareness on these issues. And I think when we go back to what is our mission, as Paul was saying, part of our mission is to get out there and be training law enforcement and working with them and getting them to understand that these cases that they are oftentimes deeming civil may well be criminal cases. And just because it involves a power of attorney or a guardianship or a probate matter doesn't mean it's not also a criminal case.
There are grants that are available to do that type of training through the Department of Justice, and those were invaluable in Seattle in helping to train law enforcement to respond to these kinds of cases and to talk through the investigative challenges and the prosecution's challenges in these cases and figure out ways to meet those challenges. But by having a prosecutor's office that's able to go out, a dedicated prosecutor who specializes in this work and is able to go out and talk with law enforcement about how to make these cases that we can prosecute, it's essential.
And the grant Kathy's talking about is the Abuse in Later Life grant of the Office on Violence Against Women, and it's really the only national level grant that works on training different communities on how to better respond to these cases. And it's a fabulous opportunity for any community.